Hi, welcome to another video. So, Claude Code is amazing, but the cost side of Claude Code is not amazing for everyone. If you're using it seriously, especially for long coding sessions, agentic tasks, refactors, debugging, and all of that, you can burn through usage pretty quickly. And if you're a student, a hobbyist, or just someone who does not want another expensive AI coding bill every month, that becomes annoying very fast. But today, I want to show you a project called Free Claude Code. And this one is pretty interesting because it basically lets you keep using Claude Code, but instead of sending the requests to Anthropic directly, it routes those requests through a local proxy to other providers. So, you can use NVIDIA, NIM, OpenRouter, DeepSeek, LM Studio, llama.cpp, or Ollama as the backend. And because some of these have free tiers, and some of them can run fully locally, you can get a Claude Code-like workflow without paying for Anthropic API usage every time. Now, before anyone gets confused, this does not magically give you real Claude Sonnet for free. That is not what this is. What it does is much more practical. It makes Claude Code talk to a local proxy, and that proxy translates or forwards the requests to a different model provider. So Claude Code still feels like Claude Code from the user side, but the brain behind it can be something like NVIDIA NIM, OpenRouter, free models, DeepSeek, or a local model running through LM Studio, Ollama, or llama.cpp. And that is actually really useful. As I'm recording this, the GitHub repo has over 14,000 stars, and it has been moving pretty fast, so clearly a lot of people want this exact thing. The main headline is simple: use Claude Code CLI and the VS Code extension for free, with no Anthropic API key required. And to be honest, that is a very strong pitch. Now, let's talk about how it works. Normally, Claude Code sends Anthropic API-style requests to Anthropic. Free Claude Code sits in the middle as a lightweight proxy. Claude Code sends the request to your local proxy, and then the proxy sends it to whatever backend you configured. So the flow is basically this: Claude Code talks to Free Claude Code talks to NVIDIA NIM, OpenRouter, DeepSeek, LM Studio, llama.cpp, or Ollama. Then the result streams back into Claude Code. That means you do not have to modify Claude Code itself. You mostly change environment variables, and that is one of the nicest parts of this project. It is a drop-in replacement style setup. You set the Anthropic base URL to your local proxy, and then Claude Code starts using that. Now, for providers, there are a few options. The recommended free option in the repo is NVIDIA NIM, which they list as 40 requests per minute. That is pretty generous for a free setup, especially compared to the tiny free tiers that a lot of AI tools give you. Then there's OpenRouter, which is useful because you get a huge number of models, including free models. OpenRouter free models do change over time, so take the exact model list with a grain of salt, but it is a very good fallback option if you like experimenting. Then there is DeepSeek, which uses a direct Anthropic-compatible API endpoint. This is not free in the same way as a local model, but DeepSeek is usually pretty affordable, and for some coding workloads, it can be a good option. And then you have the fully local options, which are LM Studio, llama.cpp, and Ollama. This is where things get really interesting. If you have a good enough machine, you can run a local coding model and use Claude Code as the interface. That means no per-token API bill, better privacy, and no provider rate limit in the same way. Of course, the downside is obvious. Local model quality and speed depend heavily on your hardware and the model you choose, so there are trade-offs. NVIDIA NIM is probably the easiest free cloud backend. OpenRouter is best if you want lots of model choices. DeepSeek is good if you want a direct provider with strong coding models. LM Studio and Ollama are great if you want the local route. And llama.cpp is great if you're already comfortable running GGUF models yourself. Now, another feature that I really like is per-model mapping. Claude Code usually thinks in terms of Claude model families like Opus, Sonnet, and Haiku. With free Claude Code, you can map those to different provider models. So, for example, you could route Opus-style requests to a stronger model, Sonnet-style requests to a cheaper or free model, and Haiku-style requests to something fast. Or you can mix providers. You can send one category to NVIDIA NIM, another to OpenRouter, and another to a local model. That is kind of awesome because it gives you much more control over cost and speed. For many people, this is the difference between I cannot afford to run long agentic coding sessions and, okay, I can actually experiment now. Now, let's go through the setup at a high level. First, you need Claude Code installed. Then you install UV, because this project uses UV and requires Python 3.14. Then go into the free-claude-code folder. Then copy the .nv example file into a .nv file. After that, you choose your provider. If you want NVIDIA NIM, you put in your NVIDIA NIM API key and set the model to something like NVIDIA_NIM/Z-AI/GLM 4.7 or whatever model you want from the current NIM list. If you want OpenRouter, you put in your OpenRouter API key and use model names with the open_router prefix. If you want DeepSeek, you put in your DeepSeek key and use the DeepSeek prefix. If you want LM Studio, you make sure LM Studio is running locally and set your model with the LM Studio prefix. If you want Ollama, you make sure Ollama is running, pull the model you want, and then use the Ollama prefix. So the idea is simple: provider prefix first, then the model name. Now, once your .nv file is configured, you start the proxy server. The repo shows running run uvicorn server :app, then using the --host 0.0.0.0 flag and the --port 8082 flag. That starts the local free Claude Code server on port 8082. Then, in a second terminal, you launch Claude Code with the Anthropic base URL pointed at that proxy. For Bash, the basic idea is to set Anthropic base URL to http://localhost:8082, set the Anthropic auth token if you're using one, and then run Claude, and that's it. Claude Code now talks to your configured provider through the proxy. Now, I do want to mention the authentication part because it matters. By default, if you leave the Anthropic auth token empty, there is no authentication. That can be fine if it is just running locally on your machine. But if you're exposing this server on a network, or if other people can access it, please set a token. The repo supports an Anthropic auth token value in .nv. If you set it, clients need to provide the same token. This is not something to ignore if you're binding to 0.0.0.0 or running it somewhere public. Free is cool. Accidentally exposing an AI proxy is not cool. Now, there is also a package install option, which is very convenient. Instead of cloning the repo manually, you can install it as a UV tool from the GitHub URL. Then you run fc0-dat init, which creates the config folder and .env template for you. After editing that config, you can start the server by running free-claude-code. That is probably the cleaner setup if you just want to use the tool and not hack on the repo. But if you want to inspect the code, contribute, or understand exactly what is happening, cloning the repo is still better. Now, one of the coolest parts is that it also works with the Claude Code VS Code extension. You start the proxy server, then open VS Code settings, search for claude-code.environment variables, and add the Anthropic base URL and auth token values there. Then you reload extensions. The repo mentions that if you see the login screen, you can click Anthropic console and authorize. You might be redirected to buy credits in the browser, but according to the README, the extension can already work because the environment variables are pointing it to your proxy. So if you prefer using Claude Code inside VS Code instead of only in the terminal, this is a big deal. There is also IntelliJ setup where you edit the JetBrains ACP agent config and add the same environment variables. So this is not just a terminal-only trick. Now, another feature that I really like is the model picker. The repo includes Claude-pick, which is an interactive selector for choosing the model from your active provider when launching Claude. So instead of editing your .env file every time you want to switch models, you can use the picker and choose the model at launch. That is very useful if you're comparing models. Maybe you want to try Kimi for one task, GLM for another, DeepSeek for another, and a local model for something else. Editing config every single time gets annoying. A picker makes that workflow much nicer. Now, the project is not just a dumb proxy either. It has request optimization built in. The README says it intercepts 5 categories of trivial calls locally, things like quota probes, title generation, prefix detection. Now, obviously, this depends on the model. Some models are much better at tool calling than others, so do not expect every random free model to behave exactly like Claude Sonnet. That is one of the biggest caveats in this whole video. The interface can be Claude Code, but the model quality is still the model quality. If you plug in a weak local model, you will get weak local model behavior. If you plug in a strong NIM or OpenRouter model, it will feel much better. So if something fails, do not immediately blame Claude Code or the proxy. The backend model matters a lot. Now, there is also smart rate limiting. The repo talks about proactive rolling window throttling, reactive 429 exponential backoff, and an optional concurrency cap. This is also important because free providers are usually rate limited. If you just blast them with agentic requests, you will hit limits. The proxy tries to make that smoother instead of just instantly breaking. Again, that is the kind of feature that sounds boring, but it matters in real usage. Now let's talk about the Discord and Telegram bot support, because this is where the project starts feeling like OpenClaw-style remote coding. Free Claude Code can run Claude Code sessions through Discord or Telegram. You can send tasks, watch live progress, and manage multiple concurrent sessions. It supports tree-based message threading, so replying to a message can fork the conversation. It has session persistence across server restarts. It can stream thinking tokens, tool calls, and results. And it even supports voice notes, where you send a voice message and it transcribes it into a prompt. That is pretty wild. This means you could have a remote autonomous coding setup where you send tasks from Discord, the server runs Claude Code in a configured workspace, and you monitor the progress from your phone. Now, would I recommend exposing this casually without thinking about permissions? Absolutely not. If you use the bot setup, configure allowed channels or allowed Telegram user IDs, configure the workspace properly, configure the allowed directory, and treat it like something that can run code on your machine, because that is literally what it is doing. But as a power user feature, it is super cool. There is also voice note transcription. The default local route uses Whisper through Hugging Face, and there is also NVIDIA NIM voice support through gRPC, so you can literally speak a coding task into Discord or Telegram and have it processed as a prompt. Again, this is the kind of thing that sounds like a gimmick until you're away from your desk and want to kick off a small task. Now, let me give my actual opinion. I think free Claude Code is one of those projects that exists because the market has a very real pain point. People love Claude Code, they love the terminal workflow, they love the agentic coding style, but they do not love constantly thinking about cost, credits, or limits. And because Claude Code already speaks a known API format, a proxy like this can give people more choice. That is the big deal here. It is not just free Claude. Again, it is not real Claude for free. The real value is choice. You can use free NIM quota, you can use free OpenRouter models, you can use cheap DeepSeek, you can run local models, you can mix backends, you can route different Claude model tiers to different providers, you can use the same basic Claude Code workflow in the terminal, VS Code, IntelliJ, Discord, or Telegram. That is a lot of flexibility. Overall, it's pretty cool. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this video, consider donating through the Super Thanks option or becoming a member by clicking the Join button. Also, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye.